Welcome to the Applicant Information Webinar for PAR 18577 for Epidemiology Cohort Studies in Heart, Lung, Blood, and Sleep Diseases and Disorders. My name is Amir, and I'm a PO in the NHLBI Division of Cardiovascular Sciences. And I'll just take a moment to go around the room here with me and introduce some of my other colleagues who are joining us today for the webinar. Hello, my name is Sharon Smith. I'm with the Division.
Cody, I'm also in the Epi branch of the Cardiovascular Sciences Division.
I'm Brian Kitts. I'm also with the Epidemiology branch of Cardiovascular Division.
I'm Magna Pepper. I'm with the implementation folks here at NHLBI.
And I'm with the Lung Division. Before we begin, I have a few quick housekeeping announcements. There we go. We have muted all attendees upon entry. We are asking that at any point during the webinar, please use the Q&A feature within WebEx to send in questions, taking those throughout the presentation as well as at the end. So please go ahead and send those in as soon as you have them. And make sure when you do submit a question that you send it to all panelists. Another note about questions is that we may be posting the questions that we received during the webinar to the FAQ page that we are getting for this webinar on the NHLBI public website. But before we post any kind of questions, we would remove any kind of identifying details about both the asker and the proposed study. So we may post it if it's too revealing, then we may not post it. The event is being recorded, and we will be posting both the slide and the webinar recording on the FAQ page. So this webinar, we're going to begin by providing a brief overview of the funding announcement. Then we discuss some of the important information about the process of requesting permission to submit an application. Since anticipating that all of the applications for this FOA are going to request more than $500,000 in direct costs in any 1 year, and are therefore going to be subject to our Institute policy regarding these types of large applications. After that, we'll provide some details about the application itself, and finally we'll end by taking questions and answering those. So the purpose of this funding announcement is to support new and innovative epidemiology research in heart, lung, blood, and/or sleep diseases, disorders, and/or phenotypes. Through FOA, the NHLBI aims to establish a new epidemiology cohort of at least 2,000 participants to lead research on a wide range of heart, lung, blood, and sleep research hypotheses. We use FOA to address some of the research gaps in our portfolio of large epidemiology studies. I'm really looking for something that's going to be innovative in this domain. We've issued this FOA in response to recommendations that were made by a 2013 working group that was comprised of members from our Institute's Advisory Council and with external experts who recommend that we implement a competitive peer review-based model for our portfolio of large epidemiology and population studies. So this really provides the investigator community with the opportunity to drive the research agenda and a new epidemiology cohort study to address some of the critical research gaps in heart, lung, blood, and sleep domains. During this presentation, you'll see some blue text with underlines. Those are embedded hyperlinks. So once the slides get posted, you'll be able to access all of the links in these slides. For new cohort studies that we will support under FOA, there are 6 eligibility criteria that must be met. First, the cohort must be able to enroll at least 2,000 participants. It predominantly focus on U.S. population, must address a variety of heart, lung, blood, and sleep research gaps. Must be innovative. We're really looking for something that's going to be new and exciting. Investigate a broad array of potential exposures and risk factors. And finally, it needs to support the study of research questions across a range of heart, lung, blood, and sleep phenotypes. NHLBI has a programmatic interest in applications that align with our Institute's strategic vision, which outlines our current research priorities, and this is a document that can be found on our public website. Interested in applications that propose to adopt or use data standards, common data elements, and standard ontologies to facilitate harmonization and sharing and analysis of data across studies. We're looking for applications that are able to support research that can address multiple scientific hypotheses, and applications that have both short, medium, and long visions for study. In other words, we're looking for studies that can provide insights from both baseline data as well as longitudinal follow-up. There are no promises about future funding beyond the initial 6 years in this award, but we are hoping that whatever cohort studies are established, that they will have future yield in the long run. So through this FOA, the NHLBI intends to fund both the study infrastructure and a detailed baseline assessment of participants. Some activities that may be supported include, but are not limited to, things protocol development and approval, the collection, analysis, storage, and maintenance of biological samples, engagement and administrative and communication tasks, and participant follow-up. You'll find on their list of sample activities in the actual FOA. Maximum project period that can be requested under this FOA is 6 years. On the slide, we're showing an example of a potential 6-project period. However, these timelines should be adjusted to fit your particular study. In the first year or two of the project period, activities that would take place before data collection would include things like establishing the study infrastructure, setting standardized study protocols, potentially standardizing them across multiple study sites, preparing clinic and consent forms. A middle phase of the project period, potentially between years 2 through 4, is where the recruitment of 2,000 plus participants would take place. It's also when the detailed baseline assessment of those participants would occur. And in the last years of the study is where activities that would take place after the data collection would happen, things like participant surveillance, data cleaning and quality control, of data to appropriate biorepositories or data repositories, and initial analyses of baseline data. The entire budget for each award is $33 million in total cost. We're thinking that we will make 2 awards, one in each application cycle, and I will go through the timelines for each of those application cycles in a minute. The $3 million total cost budget is contingent upon NIH appropriations. I want application budgets to reflect the actual needs of the proposed project. In other words, don't request a $33 million budget just because you can. In the first year of the project period, application budgets as a guidance should generally not exceed $3 million in total cost, depending on your FNA rate at your institution. That might work out to around $1.9 million in direct costs. In all subsequent years of the project period, guidance, the application budget should not exceed $6 million in total costs, which again may work out to around $3.9 million in direct costs. I would like to emphasize that there is only going to be 1 award per application cycle. Again, 1 award per application cycle. Because of this, we are anticipating that this funding announcement may be highly competitive. For the first application cycle, we would be making that award in fiscal year 2019. So across the 6-year project period, the total costs are shown in the table at the bottom of this slide. This year would be $3 million, and then in each subsequent year would be $6 million. And again, those are total costs. A few notes about the FOA before we begin diving into the details. NHLBI has a similar FOA on the street called PAR 17338, which is available to study the support, or is able to support the continuation of existing cohort studies. If you have an existing cohort that you are not planning on enriching, enrolling new members, then perhaps your study might be better suited for this other funding opportunity. Applications that we receive in response to this FOA will be, or to the PAR 18577, are to be reviewed by a special emphasis panel that NHLBI convenes and refer to Section 5 of the FOA to learn more about the review criteria. Finally, you may have heard things about NIH's new changes regarding applications that propose clinical trials. A particular funding announcement does not allow clinical trials. We will not be able to accept applications that propose, say, some type of embedded clinical trial. However, interventions that are done to phenotype participants, induced phenotypes like glucose and choline challenges, can be supported under this FOA. And NHLBI staff are able to assist you in determining whether a proposed intervention would be considered a clinical trial and thus not appropriate for this FOA. So, discussing this FOA in more detail, I would like to remind everybody that these slides or webinar recording are going to be available on the FAQ page in a few days. As I mentioned before, there are 2 application cycles for this funding announcement. Those are indicated by Cycle 1 and Cycle 2 as table. And the webinar will be focusing on the Cycle 1 application dates, which are highlighted in red. And you'll notice for the first application, receipt date in June 5th, 2018. We've got some timelines or deadlines that are coming up here within about a month or so. So that's what we're going to focus on here for the next few minutes. As mentioned, given the size of the budget that is allowed to this, we are indicating that all of the applications submitted in response to this FOA are going to be subject to our Institute's policy regarding applications that request over $500,000 in direct costs in any one year. This will apply to this funding announcement, and in essence, applicants must obtain approval from NHLBI stating we will accept the application for initial peer review. Applications that are requesting over $1.515 million in direct costs, which again anticipate will be the vast majority of all applications. The process to obtain our acceptance of application for review involves 2 steps: staff consultation and a letter of request. The staff consultation for the first application cycle is due March 1st. Because of the large anticipated interest in this funding opportunity, we are not going to be able to hold a typical staff consultation in which a team of NHLBI staff would meet one-on-one with the proposed study. The investigators would describe or present their proposed study, and there would be sort of a long discussion about questions with the investigators. Because of staff burden, we're not going to be able to necessarily do this for vacations. So this FOA only, we are going to be using an abbreviated staff consultation. You can satisfy this requirement by doing both of the following: for the FAQ page and viewing this webinar, which you are doing if you're hearing my voice, either live or via the recording. Now, if some of you have been looking at our FAQ page, this language does not match, so we will be posting updates for FAQ page shortly. But in essence, you have to review both the FAQ page and the webinar to complete that consultation requirement. And your letter of request indicate the date or dates when you did this. Your request is due on March 6th of 2018, which is almost exactly 1 month from the date of the live webinar. The letter is limited to 5 pages, which excludes references. On the list is a link to our NHLBI $500,000 policy, and that will give a lot of information about the content that this letter must contain. Please also use the budget template on that page. A couple of notes about the letter of request is that when you are describing the significance of your proposed research project, project. Please emphasize the particular research gaps in heart, lung, blood, and/or sleep domains that your proposed cohort study aims to address, and also just emphasize how the cohort study is innovative. Finally, when you email the letter to the appropriate division director, please CC new EPI cohorts at nhlbi.nih.gov. This is an email address that we are using to help track and manage all of the interest in this funding announcement. It's being monitored by multiple staff, and will really just kind of help us make sure that things are operating smoothly internally. These are the required components of the letter of request. These are all on our $500,000 policy page, but I've also listed them here. I'm not going to spend time going through these, but some of the components include the significance with the two pieces that I mentioned previously that should be emphasized when describing the significance of the project. We need a budget, and that will comprise yearly direct costs, subcontract FNA, if any, and total costs, as well as any proposed third-party support. So at the stage of the letter of request, a detailed budget is not needed. However, the budget requested in the application cannot exceed what was outlined in the letter of request, either in total or by year. I'll emphasize that later. So whatever budget you submit in the letter of request is the maximum that you're allowed to request in the final application. The letter of request should also talk about things like the specific plan for disseminating the results and plans for sharing. The criteria for NHLBI's decision as to whether or not to accept an application for initial peer review include the following items that are listed on this slide. These are also listed on our public website. This will involve things like relevance to our scientific mission, strategic vision, potential value of the knowledge gained, reasonableness of proposed annual costs, sharing plans, applicability to public health, compliance with NIH policies regarding the inclusion of children, women, and minorities. We anticipate that applicants are going to receive notification of NHLBI's decision as to whether or not to accept an application for peer review by mid-April. And from this point, you would have about 8 weeks to prepare the full application. And we're hoping that this process will prevent investigators spending time on an application that the NHLBI may not deem to be a programmatic priority. Because we are anticipating that we could receive a lot of letters of request, we anticipate that we're going to be selective with which applications we would accept for peer review. So permission to grant or to accept an application for peer review will not be granted to all letters of request. We will be a bit selective. If this approval may include NHLBI's approval in your application, otherwise your application will not be routed for peer review. And I want to emphasize that if NHLBI grants permission to submit an application, this does not guarantee that we will fund the application, nor guarantee that we would fund the application at the requested levels, regardless of the outcome of peer review. So now into some of the details about the final application itself. I'll remind you again that these slides and webinar recording are going to be posted on our FAQ page. In addition to the research strategy, there are 3 other attachments that must be completed or the application will not be reviewed. The first of these is called the baseline assessment. This is a 3-page attachment that should describe the type of data that will be collected during the baseline assessment. Attachment is the cohort management plan that will be 5 pages and describes how the cohort study is going to be managed, including details like how sites and staff are going to be trained and monitored, management, data harmonization, innovative approaches, surveillance, things like that. And if the study is going to propose to collect biospecimens, the third attachment would be 5 pages and would describe which biospecimens would be collected and how they would be collected, processed, analyzed, managed, and tracked, and stored. As mentioned earlier, the costs requested in the application may sound that they cannot exceed the budget outlined in the letter of request, either the total budget or the yearly budget. January 2018, NIH has implemented a change to its application process. Applications are now going to be required to use the Form E application package, which contains a new section that requests a lot of information about the use of humans in research as well as clinical trial information. You can see some of the NIH policy announcements for more details about this new policy. But importantly, as you are looking at the FOA, I've included a screenshot on this slide that shows you where you can access the form package. You can do this through NIH Assist, or you can use grants.gov to find this information. I see one of our colleagues on the phone has a question. Jeannie, do you have something that you'd like to interject? On mute. We'll try and connect with our colleague during the Q&A session. The section in the application is going to have some specific instructions for this FOA, so pay attention to those in the sections that are listed below. Please note that Section 3.5 is typically only optional for non-clinical applications. However, it's being required for this particular FOA. Section 4 and 5 and 4B only apply to clinical trials. So if you enter any kind of information into this section, it will generate errors and it will prevent your application from being accepted. So please leave those sections blank. Another NIH policy change is the NIH policy on the use of a single ID for multi-site research, including several links to policy announcements and implementation guidelines that the NIH has published. Please note that there are exceptions to this policy, although we anticipate that these will be rare. These will be made where the proposed single IRB would be prohibited by a federal, state, or tribal law, regulation, or policy. And importantly, please include single IRB costs in your budget. And there's some implementation assistance from NIH as to how to do this. At this point, we are done with the general presentation phase of the webinar, and so now we are going to move into audience Q&A. So this will begin taking questions from both audience. Remember to submit your questions to using the Q&A feature of WebEx to all panelists. We have a couple minutes here to begin typing in questions.